Well, welcome to the Middlesex Moments radio show. I'm Anna Wasesha, president of Middlesex Community College, and today my guest is Matt Weber, who teaches 3D art here at the college. And how long have you been teaching here?
10 years.
Oh, that's a long time.
Yeah, and as an adjunct, 3 to 5 years before that.
Oh, so you've pretty much been living on this campus for the last 15 years of your life, and you're a young person. So.
Yeah, right out of grad school I started teaching here.
Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, wonderful. So Matt is here today with me because I asked him if he'd be willing to talk about what he did on his sabbatical year, which was the entire academic year last year, and then talk about the shows that he's got coming up that will display for people who get over here to the college the actual work that you produced. And so we'll start out at the very beginning by saying we realize this is radio and it's very hard to talk about art on the radio. But maybe 3D art is a little easier to talk about on the radio. So where would you like to start? Why don't you tell us where you traveled last year?
Sure. I started in the summer in Costa Rica, in central Costa Rica in the north, looking at volcanoes, rainforests, dry forest, cloud forests. Spent a lot of time along the Pacific coast, which is an area I really hadn't visited before. I found it fascinating and interesting, and of course my work is really looking at environmental places, especially extreme climates. So I was really looking for those out-of-the-way places, and so renting a car was the way to do that. And so it was a lot of fun and a great adventure. In the fall, I went to Joshua Tree and did a lot of hiking and spent time in the high and low desert. And then in the spring, I went to the Everglades, and then also Big Cypress National Preserve is in the northern section of that area, and was really looking for cypress swamps and the Thousand Islands area on the Gulf side, and then also Biscayne Bay, which is the southern area. So it was amazing, a lot of traveling and a lot of fun.
Right. Would you consider yourself to be an environmental artist?
I think studying in grad school, there is an environmentalist movement that was 20 to 40 years ahead of my generation. So we looked at those artists, but really we're trying to find other ways to talk about being part of the environment or seeing ourselves within the environment and making works that either respond to or speak to those issues without having them be overtly political or necessarily be transforming the environment. So to go into a site and then change the site to make a comment on the site is counterproductive to some extent, but is how a lot of those artists started in the 1970s. And so it's an interesting time to be looking at the environment as a subject to be making work, but still having to make our own place.
And as you're saying that, I'm thinking about Andy Goldsworthy.
Absolutely.
But he creates installations in the natural world. To some degree.
Yeah, that's really where he started. He was an artist without a studio.
Right.
And so he worked outdoors in his community, and now he's also will make interior things and has been given opportunities to work in venues in every possible situation. So it's been interesting. But also I see that he's an artist who has opened doors for us. When I do have exhibitions, people know who he is. Like people would know who Picasso was in the 60s and 70s. So it is nice to have one artist who has his work out there. People know who he is. They're interested. They're buying his books, at bookstores, and really are taken by his photographs, which is how he communicates his work primarily.
Right, he has to, because it's essentially ephemeral, right? It's here today, gone tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, you must have taken a lot of photographs as a way of sort of recording, at least in your own mind, what you were seeing.
I do, but I struggle with the idea that when the camera goes to my face, I am no longer part of where I am. And
yes,
so
right.
I don't have a connection with the camera in the way that an artist like Goldsworthy seems to. He seems to be thinking about the photograph as he's working, and I think that that's interesting. And I am also grateful that I don't have that orientation, because it's already well vetted and been done. And done so well.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. Well, there's a wonderful film that they made about him. I can't remember the name.
Rivers and Tides.
Thank you very much. Yeah. And if anybody in the listening audience hasn't seen it, it's really worth watching. But now we're going to take a break, and when we come back, let's talk about Matt Weber's work. Okay, so we'll be right back. Well, welcome back. It's Middlesex Moments Radio Show, and Matt Weber today is going to be talking to us as best he can on the radio about the work that he produced when he was on sabbatical last year. So why don't we just try?
Sure.
So tell me about the piece that you most fell in love with as you were making it, and what does it look like, and what's it made of?
Sure. Now, I should start out saying my goals for the the studio portion of sabbatical was to spend as much time in the studio as possible when I wasn't traveling, and wood is the material I've been working with primarily, so trying to work with it in new ways was what I was really after. Of course, drawing, I was experimenting with stone, working with clay, with lead, and what I found was that really working with wood was the thing that I was the most excited about. It's also the thing that's slow. It takes months to finish a piece, and so there isn't this rush. Mistakes, if they happen over a course of days, so you don't feel them in the same way. And it was carving in layers, so stripping away layers of wood that would expose the grain of the wood in a three-dimensional way was what I was really after for these initial projects. And I'm still working that way today. So the work isn't completely done as a series of works, but in this exhibition there'll be 4 finished pieces in that style, and I'm really excited to keep going.
So first of all, what kind of wood?
Local woods, maples, oak, ash, and I saw a mulberry tree in my neighbor's yard blow down yesterday that I'm hoping to catch a piece of as well.
Yeah.
And so as much as possible, getting these local pieces of wood are important also because the wood carves best when it's still wet.
Oh, I was going to ask, is it green wood, essentially?
If I can. When it's very dry, cracks are already there and you can't necessarily carve as easily. It's better if the cracks emerge later after the carving is done. It creates distortions and these happy accidents that artists are often looking for in their work. So it's another layer of abstraction that starts to occur.
So do you run into rivers of sap, or does sap ooze out of all the pores of wood? I actually don't know how that works, do you?
The pines are very sappy, but the oaks and the maples and the ashes are less so. But if it is sappy, it ends up on the chisels and they just are cleaned off, and it's not an issue as much. But as they dry out, it is that sap that's, and the moisture that's disappearing.
Sure. And the smell. It must have a smell.
Absolutely. Yeah, but I wouldn't say that it's something that I experience in a way that somebody who might first walk in about 10 minutes, you don't smell it anymore. But somebody might smell it on your clothes after, or they come in and they say, oh, the smell.
Yeah. Well, do you finish the piece by then varnishing or applying something to the surface?
I'm trying not to do that, but there are occasions where I've had exhibitions where the work has to be outdoors for a long period of time, and then I'll use some kind of a penetrating sealant where it's invisible. Some touches of paint, color, something I am trying to bring into my work, but I found it was black, white, brown, like earth, tones and values more so than the bright colors I was after. So I'm hoping to still be able to move into that direction with color more, but it's only when I see something that's not working and it needs contrast. Then like a black or a brown paint or a stain is really what I'm after. Ink is nice, an India ink or something that really gets in and lets the pores of the wood still reveal themselves.
Sure. So why was it that you were first drawn to wood, do you think?
I think in grad school, when you're looking for what you're going to be doing for those 2 years, those materials were something that were affordable. I did already have a studio that was equipped in that way. And as I was looking for what I wanted to say about the environment, it was something that was supported by my committee. They seemed to say, a hammer and chisel carving is so antiquated that it might be just the thing to do right now. And I'm still working in that way. Different, forms, but similar approaches.
Sure. One of the things that architecture friends always say to me, which I have to say I usually laugh about it when I hear it, is that that's not what the building wants to be. That's not what the room wants to be. And I think, so I anthropomorphize like this room thinking this is really what I want to be. But if you transpose that thinking to the wood, are you working to find out what that wood wants to be? Or are you changing it?
I have that. I asked that question because I think it's funny, but the truth is the tree wants to be left alone.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the honest answer. But I'm trying to create some kind of a compromise or a relationship that's somewhere between the wood in its natural form and also exposing that interior that already exists. I mean, we know if we cut across the wood and we see the rings, it's interesting. We can count them and age the tree. But what happens when those rings are pulled more like an onion, when it dries out in the refrigerator? Those kind of things are also where it goes from being wood that would be burned in a wood stove to something that really has sculptural properties and of interest without having to necessarily be a thing or an image. I'm not trying to illustrate a particular form. The tree already has something that's in there.
So you're kind of revealing it in a way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know this is radio, but what are the dimensions? Is this 5 feet long, 10 feet high, or is it something you could hold in your hands? What is it?
I have the ability to move 2 tons. So that's 4,000 pounds, and that would be a tree that would be the size of, let's say, a kitchen table. Would be the dimensions when it's still round. And then from that, I can get much smaller pieces. So we could be 5 feet by 3 feet. But when the wood is, made smaller and smaller, they become smaller. I do also have this new goal for myself that I'm trying to make pieces that when they're done, I can pick them up. Even if it's, just for a moment, that I'm finding that the larger pieces as I'm getting older are more difficult to get into exhibition spaces. Mm-hmm. And I've been turned away where I get there and the elevator isn't ready, or they don't want me to go across their floor with my carts. And so I'm trying to find a way to make bigger work without doing that.
Right.
And it's frustrating to have that happen.
That's a real
when
challenge.
You expect a show. Yeah.
Exactly. So what do you figure that might be in terms of pounds?
I think that I can pick up 80 pounds quickly and move it around.
Sure.
And so that's about right.
Yeah, I wonder what a refrigerator weighs.
Yeah,
it's got to be a lot more. But I guess I can understand a gallery owner not wanting to drag a refrigerator even on a cart across these beautiful wooden floors
without special insurance. And a painter picks up their work and they don't seem to be noticed. But sculptors have another problem, and it's that there must be a history of damage that's happened for sculptors doing these things, and I understand.
Yeah. Do you think that within the art producing community, art creating community, there's a different personality for people who work in 3D than versus the 2D?
I mean, there's always the Da Vinci Michelangelo conflict, where Michelangelo was the dirty sculptor and Da Vinci was the clean painter. And I think that we all think that the way that we produce whatever we produce, is the better way. So I think it's hard to imagine that one is better than the other. Of course, in terms of the art market, painting sell much better than sculpture.
Oh, so should have thought of that, right?
There is that, that side of it.
Well, because of the display challenge, where are you going to put it?
I think so. Maybe easier to sell, easier to move around, easier to store.
Yeah, but then you see blown glass, for example, the Chihuly, pieces. Those are quite 3D.
They are.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, but he's definitely created a market that is helping the whole glass world.
Yes, I'm sure. Yeah. And definitely raising the prices of those glass. Although coming from the Midwest where there's a lot of stained glass, I really do love colored glass. I mean, it changes the way you see light, for example. And it marks the time because it changes as the light changes across a day.
As a student, I was working in glass, and what I found is I don't want to be that hot. When you're that hot, it's hard to make decisions, to think clearly. Like, that's also a special person who can very calmly ask for help to avoid being burned or, a disaster. And I've been amazed by the communication skills that it takes to be that kind of an artist. To be alone in the studio, you can be grumpy, you can be quiet, you can be loud, but when you really are collaborating with groups of people, it's fascinating.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yes, molten glass. Well, you do work in ceramics, right?
Yeah.
Which is got to be at the same high temperatures.
It is, but you're not holding them in your hands and on a pipe.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you were in graduate school, did you have the chance to try out all these different media?
In graduate school, that seemed to be that you would get a very big studio and you would have 2 years to make your work. And so if I did ask for, technical assistance, it was more I would be given names of artists that I could look at to try to find, more information. But there wasn't necessarily access to technical assistance. So what I had done is I took that summer between the 2 years and went to Vermont to the carving studio and sculpture center, where they run workshops for the entire summer: stone, glass, wood, welding. And I was able to watch, a lot of them were professors from other colleges teaching these summer workshops to groups of beginners, essentially. And so I had access to learning the technical skills, but also to see how to teach them. Mm-hmm. How do you teach somebody who's never touched stone before to carve stone? And I gained so much in that summer that I think without it, I probably wouldn't have gone into teaching. So it was a gift.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, we have to take a break again. I'm sorry to say that. But when we come back, I want to ask you about creativity in general, which is a giant topic, and then about your shows. So we'll make sure that we tell everyone that they can come over here to Middlesex Community College and see the work we're trying to describe on the radio. So we'll be right back after this message. Well, welcome back to Middlesex Moments. And Matt Weber, who's an art professor here at Middlesex Community College, who spent a year on sabbatical. And over the break, we were talking about thousands of things, which we sort of wish we had recorded for the program, about creativity and size and scope and scale of artwork and keeping it for a long time and places to keep it. And so actually, what's the small, have you ever worked on anything really small?
Yes. I've made tiny things using a milling machine, which is similar to what a precision manufacturing program. Now it's, of course, computer run, but if you were to do it by hand in the old way, I use machines like that and things that are too small to hold. And that is very satisfying, and I've really enjoyed it. And actually, it's the first thing I exhibited here as an adjunct in one of our exhibitions, and was really glad to have the show in the niche because the work was too small to really be shown in a big gallery. You know, they don't hold the space well.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the biggest thing you've ever produced?
The biggest thing I've produced is in Cazenovia, New York, at a sculpture park called Stone Quarry Art Park. And it's made out of clay tiles for a roof. And they're stacked up into big circles. And every couple of years they blow down. And even this summer I went back and rebuilt it. And it's really nice to have a piece that is temporary in nature, but it really is like a 30 by 30 foot, installation or group of sculpture. And to see it aging really well and lasting so long is a gift.
Nice.
Yeah. And also, it's a piece I produced maybe 12 years ago. And so it's something that I haven't lost interest in, which isn't common. I mean, oftentimes we make something and a few years later we wish we didn't. And so it's really the only piece that I have that's outdoors, that's permanent.
Yeah, and outdoor sculpture parks lend themselves to very large, dramatic pieces. And you must have to have a special studio to create some of that.
I just work outdoors.
So that would be the largest studio possible.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and then I do have a barn with interior spaces, but the outdoors I have a big crane, so that's how I can move things on and off of the truck, for example. And then I have a porch that also comes off of the studio to be out of the rain or snow. And especially working with a lot of dust, sometimes working with paint and fumes, to be outdoors is the best way to work. And that's also what I picked up when I was in Vermont, to really see how people make big stone sculpture. They don't move them into studios like we see on TV. They just put a tent around them. And if the wind blows in one direction, they put a tarp there. It's amazing to be able to work in that kind of environment. And for somebody who likes to be outdoors, it's perfect. Right?
Yes. I can picture that in my mind.
Yeah.
So speaking of picturing in our minds, you've got a reception and a whole gallery showing. So why don't you tell us about this?
Sure. From the exhibition is titled Tracings, Drawings, and Turnings, and the work will include sculpture and also drawings. The exhibition runs from November 7th to December 22nd. The reception is November 9th from 1:30 to 3 o'clock in Pegasus Gallery. And then an artist talk will be held also in Pegasus Gallery on November 21st, 11 to 11:45.
And Pegasus is within the first floor of the Chapman Hall Library. So main floor of the library, then you go into the library proper, turn to your left, and Pegasus is right to your right.
Yes.
And there should be some signs there, no doubt.
Yes. And I'll also have work in the niche space, which is in Founders Hall by the Records Office.
And what are you putting in the niche?
Drawings and then the small turned sculptures that were produced on a lathe. So works that are smaller, that don't hold the space in the gallery as well. So the gallery is going to be bigger work, the niche will be the smaller pieces.
And of course, this is always free and open to the public. Public encouraged to come and encouraged to think about taking art classes here at the college, right? Because
Absolutely.
We often have adult learners in these classes, right? So as you were talking about the machinery that you use, it seems like that's a different set of skills than one ordinarily thinks about with creative artists. Often it's being able to capture what they see on paper using pens and ink and paint. And now you're talking about using lathes and the kind of machinery that our students are learning to operate to create propellers for airplanes. So what do you have inside of your studio? Tell us what the equipment is.
I'm lucky to have inherited big machinery from family members. So drill presses and table saws
Seriously?
And band saws, and so a lot of stuff has been with me since I was a teenager. And also I was able to see how they were used, when I was a child. So I'm working with my grandfather's drill press, for example. And so there is something about the way it's set up and, how he was using it that's very helpful. And then, of course, I'm bringing in new machines as I have an idea or an understanding of something that needs to be done. So over the sabbatical, I did bring in what's called a bowl lathe, which is a lathe that has a single point rather than holding the wood between 2 points. And by spinning the wood, you can carve out the inside to make concave, convex shapes. And that has had a learning curve that has been really exciting. And it's not just what you make on it, it's how you change the machine to be able to use it in the way you want to make it. So, putting sandbags to hold it in place, replacing the motor, all the kind of tinkering that is involved is the thing that I really enjoy when I'm not really in the right place to make work. So if you have an hour, it's not enough time to necessarily start carving, but it's more than enough time to pull a motor off of a machine, oil it, and then wait. And then come back to it later, put it back on, see if it's right. Those are the things that are, I think, a lot of fun.
We were going to talk about creativity a little bit. So one of the things that I think about when you describe what your process is that you must have a mind that sees how things work together and go together. And are people born with that, or is that developed in people? Some people can't figure out how you would screw a leg onto a table. Want 2 parts, a flat tabletop and a leg. But other people have this tremendous mechanical ability, I think it's called.
Yeah.
You've turned it into a creative mechanical ability. But were you born that way?
I think that there's children who pull things apart, and there's children who use them as they are, and then there might be children who improve them. I pulled them apart. They didn't always go back together, but understanding how they work, how they function, I think really helped. And I think in terms of sculpture, it was something that would allow me to continue after high school and still be in the wood shop, welding, carving, plastics, glass, a lot of these hands-on technologies that are hard to really do vocationally other than going to art school. And so I understood very early on that it was a very good choice for someone like me, because I wasn't particularly interested in cars or, construction or electrical.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to build houses or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in fixing them, but I wouldn't necessarily want to build one. And so it's about just figuring out who you are when you're young and then following along. And luckily, I had a family that was very supportive.
Mm-hmm. But you have to be able to see that what the capacities are of the materials you're working with, right?
Sure.
And so things like balance and
Sure.
you must have that just innate ability.
I
Or I suppose you can experiment with it and see when it doesn't work.
I am trying to do things with wood that you really wouldn't normally do. So the way that I might be working with a chisel, like cutting across the grain or in opposition to the grain, is something that you're not supposed to do. So I do that so that the way the wood is torn. If it seems like you should be sanding the wood, then I'm going to try to rough it up. If clay needs to be really thin and delicate, I'm going to make it very thick and heavy and hope it doesn't explode. So I'm really trying to figure out what the rules are and then go in the other direction. Seems to be the most sensible creative process in the contemporary period. Right? I mean, the idea that rules are meant to be broken is funny to say,
Right.
but in the studio, when you do that, that's really when interesting things start to happen. And of course, safety is always, considered, but to try to find what those things are that a material not just wants to be, but can also be, can help me find the compromise in between. I spent time also working with stone, granite, local brownstone, marble over the sabbatical. And none of those things really came of sculpture that I would exhibit. But having that experience and working with the various machinery to manipulate them did help me see wood differently. Like, I wish this would do what wood does, or I wish that this would do what metal will do. And so that's helpful too.
Tell me a little bit about what you do with stone
Sure.
to shape it.
Sure. Granite is crushed, so you're actually trying to burst the crystals that are there. Marble can be kind of chipped away very slowly. It can also be crushed, but it is very delicate, so you can bruise the stone. So I would spend time bruising the stone to try to ruin the crystals, so these white marks that we wouldn't see in museums would start to become an expressive part of the stone. Stone we think of as in blocks oftentimes, so trying to make it not a block, but still seem like it came from a block would be some of the interest. And so the idea of process art or intuitive art is sometimes so applied to this way of working, where rather than saying, I'm going to carve a giraffe out of this block of stone, I'm really looking at the stone and saying, what can I do to this stone that lets it still be stone, but it's something else. It speaks to the environment that it's from, maybe has some relationship to the quarry. Maybe it suggests water or clouds. Maybe it, because it's so heavy, maybe it wants to be something light or fluid. So asking it to be 2 things or 3 things or 4 things, finding that ambiguous space between being something and not something specific is what I'm after, which doesn't lend itself to great verbal descriptions.
Exactly.
They're physical experiences. You see the work and you say, oh, I understand now.
Right. But where do you find the stone?
The quarries in Vermont are the most local place that I've gotten them.
So you walk into a quarry area and say, this is the stone?
They sell stone in stone yards up there. I'm in Barrie, Vermont, where a lot of the Rock of Ages comes from. You can get granite. There's a great market for sculptors in those areas.
I would never have guessed. Well, I'm afraid that our program is coming to an end. So I want to remind everybody that Matt Weber's show here at Middlesex Community College is going to run from November 7th to December 22nd, which is a really good long time. The library's open most of the time. So just drop by and take a look. But if you want to attend the reception, it's Wednesday, November 9th from 1:30 to 3, and maybe best of all, the Artist Talk, which is November 21st from 11 to 11:45. All of this is in Pegasus Gallery, and I think that is really the best way to spend a free hour, is to come over here and see this work. So I want to thank Matt Weber for being with me today on Middlesex Moments Radio Show. This is Anna Wasesha wishing you all a very good day.